We're going to have a look now at teaching the hip hinge position to general population clients, and it's a position that a lot of people can really struggle with. A lot of common faults that we see, if you just turn to the side, a lot of common faults we see when we ask people to hip hinge is that as they go forward they'll round the back, and they'll also, as they tip forward from the hip, they'll actually move forward and move their knees forward, move their whole body weight forward, stand back up. And basically it can be a source of huge frustration for us as coaches when we try to do this. There's a number of different proprioceptive tools that we can use, the dowel rod and bands amongst them, to move someone into a correct hip hinge, but I want to give you some insight on how to do it without equipment so that your client gets the feel of how they could be moving, and then they'll be able to take that education with them into a variety of different exercises like RDLs and good mornings. So we'll start off with a stretch that I really like to use for teaching a hip hinge called a waiter's bow. And basically I'm just going to get Zoe to put her hands out in front of her and pretend that she's holding a tray, like a tray full of glasses. And as she extends her hips backwards, pushes her hips backwards, she's going to keep her hands flat and forwards, pretending that she's holding a tray and she doesn't want to tip glasses off the tray. She's going to stop when she feels a stretch coming up the back of her legs into her hamstrings, and she's really going to start to get the feeling of correct hamstring and glute engagement as she moves her body weight back up and back down into the stretch position without having to need a dowel rod or a band to pull her hips backwards. Thank you. Okay. That was lovely. Another thing that I really like to do if someone's struggling to begin with is use the dowel rod, like I said, but I like to give it to someone. I'll get you to hold it, one hand over the top and one hand below. And it can be an awkward thing for someone to get a hold of. It's actually super hard for someone with who doesn't have great shoulder mobility to get into this position. And one of the reasons why I gave it to Zoe and asked her to put herself into the position is my own shoulder mobility won't let me go into that position. So it's not suitable for everybody to do. But again, she can now, while maintaining that dowel rod position, push her hips backwards and not lose contact with the dowel rod at the hip and at the thoracic spine and at the head. So she's got her points of contact, which is going to give her that feeling of where neutral spine is going to be as she goes through the movement. Thank you. Another thing that we can do for this one then is to start to use unilateral movements. Sometimes bilateral movements are quite difficult for people who are trying to attempt a hip hinge. So we can recreate the movement one leg at a time and again work to get the feeling where it belongs in the back of the leg, into the hamstring and glute. So I'll just roll a plate up onto the bench, onto the platform. It's just a low plate to begin with because this can be quite an aggressive stretch. It's a form of unilateral good morning, called a Polish good morning. So I'm just going to get you to put one of your feet up onto the plate. I'm going to get you to soften your front knee. That's it. And put yourself back into that waiter's bow stretch position. So you're still going to use this cue of your hands to keep your chest lifted. And now it's the same sort of movement with that soft knee, not going any more than 15 degrees bend, pushing your hips backwards and really starting to get that stretch into your front leg. And then coming back up again. Thank you. All of these different little tips, of course, are very, very client specific, and I would say that a hip hinge pattern is simply an advanced movement that's not for some people as well. There's a lot of other hip extension exercises that people can use, moving themselves on the ground into a hip bridge position, doing all sorts of hip lifts and hip thrust positions. Still going to train hip extension for the clients that really struggle with a hip hinge position.
Cut. Hey?